ग्लोबल स्किल डेवलपमेंट मिशन में आपका स्वागत है।
Our next principle is whitespace, allowing our design to breathe with the use of whitespace. And what I mean by whitespace is simply empty space inside of a layout or inside of a design. It's sometimes referred to as negative space. Perhaps you've heard that. So whitespace allows our design to kind of open up a little bit. It allows it to breathe and relax somewhat. It makes it easier for the viewer to understand the message that you're trying to communicate or that your layout is trying to communicate. Whitespace also makes a design cleaner, simpler, and as I mentioned just a second ago, easier to understand. Whitespace is very, very much related to our first principle, which is the organization of the information inside of our layouts. And it's also very much related to composition as well. So let's take a look at this. Here's an example that we had earlier. And as you can see, there's a lot of empty space inside this layout. In fact, the entire center area of this layout is completely empty. And perhaps you were looking at this earlier on when I first showed you this, and you thought, geez, there's a lot of empty space there. But it's allowing the design, it's allowing the layout to open up and breathe a little bit. Just because there's empty space inside of a layout doesn't mean that it needs to be filled with something. We want to let the design breathe. And this particular, let's call it a restructuring of the layout, to me anyway, it feels claustrophobic. I feel like I'm literally being choked by this information. And furthermore, this violates our earlier principle about organizing the information, because right away I see you're invited to and then a telephone number, and then you're invited to and then a telephone number. My brain has to filter out and try and organize this information itself. And as I've mentioned many times earlier, it's making my brain work and process to try and figure out exactly what it is that I'm looking at. I didn't even see you're invited to John's surprise birthday, or specifically John's surprise birthday. I saw that you're invited too. So hopefully you understand what I'm saying here. Okay, so why not go with something that's going to be a little bit easier on the eyes? Perhaps something like this. Now, this example might not be the absolute best that this layout can be, but it's easily 1,000 times better than the previous example that I just had up on screen for you. Okay? So unless you're going for some kind of a radical, bold, attention-grabbing statement, I would be very leery about cramming your design corner to corner, top to bottom, with as much content as you can. But even this, to me, feels claustrophobic, and I feel like I'm getting choked. Right away, I see used whitespace, use whitespace. That's where my eye's drawn to right away. Use whitespace layouts, use whitespace layouts. That's what my brain is getting out of this particular layout. So we want to use whitespace to our advantage. We want to allow it to give our layouts a chance to open up and breathe, as I've said several times already. So let's try to keep things clean and simple and easy to understand for the viewer and not hammer them over the head with too much information. Let's bring order and cleanliness and tidiness to what would otherwise be complete chaos and a complete mess. Here's another example. The silhouetted photo down towards the bottom of this movie poster, the large empty background towards the top of this movie poster lets everything breathe. It's easy for you and I to digest what this is. If you look for it, you'll find whitespace nearly everywhere. This is probably the most famous example of the use of subtle whitespace. Of course, the FedEx logo. Have you seen this one or heard of this one before? See the arrow going from the E to the X in X? That is a very subtle use of whitespace, and of course FedEx is all about moving things forward, moving packages forward. Here's a final example for you to consider, and again, look around yourself. You'll find lots and lots of good examples and bad examples. Here's a good example. This particular book cover lets everything breathe. The entire layout, the entire design breathes. Notice the use of information organization, our first principle, of course. Notice also that everything is center aligned inside this layout, except for that tiny quote way up towards the top right corner. And alignment, of course, was an earlier principle as well. But here, the center alignment gives the entire layout a much more formal, much more structured sense or look, doesn't it? The design also has rhythm, I wanted to point this out, by repeating the marbles and also the typeface that's used throughout the entire layout. So these marbles, what I did myself is I put my hand over the marbles in the top left corner, towards the top left corner. If there was just the one marble underneath the book title, Outliers, then you and I would think it's a mistake, or we would look at that and go, what is that supposed to be? Is that supposed to be a crystal ball, or is it supposed to be just a single marble, or is that planet Earth? I don't really know. But they throw in a handful of other marbles or crystal balls or whatever the heck they're supposed to be up towards the top left, and everything's tied together immediately. Okay? And of course, this layout also uses plenty of white space and contrast, contrast being our next and final principle. Let's go and check it out.